Good morning, Winthrop. This is Stephen Hines from the Hines Group at Robert Paul Properties right here in Winthrop, Massachusetts. This morning, I wanted to take a moment to talk about what happens after a home inspection. As you know, when you put an offer in on a property, oftentimes there's a home inspection contingency. This gives the buyer an opportunity to come into the home with a licensed home inspector to inspect the home top to bottom to look for material defects, normal wear and tear, to educate the buyer on um, how to use different systems in the house, the heating system, the stove, the microwave, the dishwasher. It's really it's part instructional and it's part inspectional. Now, after the home inspection is complete, the buyer will get like a 50-page home inspection report with pictures and details and grades. I don't know what the letter grades are, it depends on the inspector, on level of condition for different items. So once you have that report, you sit down with your buyer's agent, you look through the report, and you start to think about which of the items you might want the seller to address before closing, and you also start to think about the items that you are willing to address after closing. When I work with buyers, I always tell them to ignore the normal wear and tear items. Unless you're buying a new construction house, and especially if you're in Winthrop where everything was built 150 years ago, chances are there's going to be lots of little things that are normal wear and tear. Missing handles on cabinets, loose drawers, creaky floors, maybe cracks in like a horsehair wall, maybe some settling cracks in ceilings, different things like that. Those are not items that you want to bring to the seller and ask them to replace. Chances are the seller's tolerance for repair and replace is not very high. They've priced the house in such a way that reflects the current condition of the property. When issues come up that are related to safety or well-being, that's when a buyer really does have the right to assert or to compel repairs on the property before closing. Some examples of the more serious items could be knob and tube electrical. If you're not aware of what knob and tube electrical is, it's a really old type of wiring that was used in the early 1900s. Standalone, unbothered, knob and tube wiring actually functions pretty well. When you start to build insulation and such around the knob and tube, it's not really protected for heat disbursement. So the knob and tube could actually cause fires when touched with insulation. And a lot of homeowners insurance policies will not insure your house if there's active knob and tube visible within it. And so if you find knob and tube during your home inspection, chances are you're going to have to ask the seller to address it, or at least pay to address it through what we call a closing cost credit. And we can talk about a closing cost credit in a different video. Other things that you may want addressed during a home inspection. This is one that came up recently. If you're in an old bathroom that doesn't have like a ventilation vent, and the only form of ventilation in the bathroom is a window, and because of years of moisture, that window has expanded to a point where it cannot open and close anymore, you may want to ask the seller to repair the window before closing, just so you can have proper ventilation in that bathroom. I mean, I think that's a more than reasonable request. If you happen to find frayed wires, for instance, somewhere, wires that have either been chewed on by a pet, rabbits, for instance, love wires for some reason. Frayed wires are another one. Obviously a safety hazard, obviously needs to be fixed. It can be fixed before closing. It can be fixed after closing via a closing cost credit, but something like that should be fixed. If, for instance, the roof on the building is at the very, very, very end of its usable life, and you're looking at a roof replacement in the next 24 months, you can't expect the seller to replace a whole roof for you before closing, but you can expect the seller to maybe help a little bit financially. Maybe put a little money aside after closing, so when the roof is ready to go and you are ready to replace it, you do have a little bit of a cushion there for funds. There are also times where the age of the roof is factored into the price itself, and therefore the seller wouldn't be willing to offer any money for the roof. That's something that your agent needs to explore with the seller agent, how the house was priced and was the roof considered in that pricing. If that's the case, it really would not be appropriate to ask the seller to pay for that. It all just depends. At the end of the day, you really, really need to lean on your buyer's agent to get a temperature on how the seller and the seller's agent are feeling about negotiating on home inspections. Fact of the matter is, there are some sellers that will not negotiate at all based on home inspection findings. Basically, they're saying the home inspection is for your informational purposes only. The house is priced to reflect any flaws within the house, and sort of that's just the end of it. There are some sellers that are super willing to get things done that they find are reasonable. One example is recently we had, I don't know if you've ever seen double paned windows. Sometimes moisture starts to build up between the two panes of glass. That basically means the seal around the windows had busted at some point and moisture started to get inside. Now, with moisture inside two panes of windows, there is no functional defect. The window behaves exactly the same as if it would. It's more of like an aesthetic thing. Nobody wants to see moisture when you're looking out your window and it's all fogged up and you can't see through. I mean, that's something that's a total reasonable request for a buyer to ask of a seller. It doesn't mean the seller is going to do it. It can be an expensive process. It doesn't mean the seller is going to be willing to fix that. They may have bought the property. The seal may have been busted then. They lived with it for 25 years. And now, they're saying someone else can live with it. Like, we didn't ask for it, so we're not going to let anybody else ask for it. And that's totally reasonable, okay. I mean, this stuff is all subjective. It all comes down to what your threshold and what your financial ability allows for repairs. And and how that balances with the seller's financial ability and just general willingness to get repairs done before closing as well. Sometimes sellers work like 15 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they simply just don't have time to get this stuff done before closing. Usually it has nothing to do with personality. Usually it just has to do with logistics or financial ability. So my suggestion both to sellers and buyers, never let inspection related requests get everybody all hot and bothered about the transaction. Some things can be fixed, some things cannot. A lot of this stuff isn't really a big deal. It may seem like a big deal when you're spending a lot of money on a house, but if you really sit back and think about it, these are things that can be done over many years. They don't need to be done imminently. And yet again, there are things like water infiltration. If there's an active water situation, like, you may need to have that addressed before closing. That's totally reasonable. If there's an inactive water situation, like if there's a stain that's 20 years old and the problem was fixed with a roof replacement, but the stain was never painted over, I mean, that's not a big deal. That's not something that you should reasonably expect a seller to address. As long as they have a good explanation as to why that stain's there and why it hasn't been painted over, I mean, that's something that you should really let go. If you really love this house, like, no house is perfect. In owning a home, there is always maintenance to be done. Always. You can always expect that. They can fix that water stain and it can come back 5 years from now and you're still going to have to fix it again. I mean, owning a home is a challenge. That's part of it. So at the end of the day, be reasonable, be respectful, approach these things with tact, approach these things with compassion and empathy on both sides. And I think we'll have no problem getting to the finish line. I hope this was helpful. Next time you get yourself into a home inspection situation, just to take a breath, do your breathing exercises, take a breath, approach this realistically, and I think all of us can get to where we want to be, and that's a transference of the property from seller to buyer. Enjoy the rest of your day. It looks like a cloudy one out there, but I hope you enjoy it anyway, and we'll be seeing you soon.